Welcome back, everyone, to another week of our study of the weekly Haftara. This week, we have the privilege of reading Parashat Beha'alotekha, and as a result, we read for the Haftara something that should sound familiar to us. It starts in Parak Bet of Zechariah, Rani v'simchi b'Atzion. And if you're like me, you say to yourself, wait, didn't we read that at some point this year? And the answer is yes. There are two Haftorot that repeat. This is one of them. The Haftarah of Rani v'simchi b'Atzion is also read on Chanukah, Shabbos Chanukah, and it's also read for Parashat Beha'alotekha, which leads into our traditional first question, which is, what's the connection between Parashat Beha'alotekha and Parak Bet and Gimel and part of Parak Daled of Sefer Zechariah, which is the Haftarah? And at first glance, and really almost everybody says this, and I'm not disagreeing with it, although I think there's more. Most people say, hey, that's the beginning of the Parsha. The Psukim say, read at the very, very beginning of the Parsha, Vaydaber Adonai Moshe Lemor, Daber laHaron va'amarta elav Beha'alotekha haneirot amul pnei haminorah ya'iru shivat haneirot vayas kein Aaron amul pnei haminorah ha'elon neirotel kasher tziva Adonai et Moshe v'zeh ma'aseh haminorah miksha zahav ad yirecha ad pircha mikshahi Kamare asher hero Adonai et Moshe kein asat hamenorah. Okay, those psukim are echoed in our Haftarah, where the Navi says, "Vayomer Eli ma ataroeh." The Navi describing his interaction with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So God asks the Navi, "What do you see?" V'omar ra'iti v'hinei menorad zahav kula v'gula al rosha v'shiva neiroter alea shiva v'shiva mutzakot la neirota shal rosha. And, at first glance, and most people say this, the reason we read the Haftarah of Zechariah for Parashat Beha'alotekha is the connection to the menorah, right? The description of the menorah is similar to our description in our Parsha, etc., etc. But having read the Haftarah and having learned the Haftarah, there's so much there, you want more. And the truth is, there's so much more in our Parsha. Our Parsha, in many ways, is the most episodic Parsha in the Torah. Episodic, I mean multiple stories. There is, for example, it starts with the menorah, but then it moves immediately on to the consecration of Leviim, then it moves to Karban Pesach, then it moves to the Masaut, then it moves to the Chatzotzrot, and that's just the first half of our Parsha. Right, there are so many different stories. Now, in many ways, that also mirrors our Haftarah, which the marot that Zechariah sees. There are a number of marot in our Haftarah, but even so, I think our Haftarah has a theme, and I think our Parsha has a theme, and I'd like to connect it to. I had this idea anyway, and then I saw Rav Moshe Lichtenstein's Sefer on the Haftarah, and he says the exact same thing, which obviously gave me much more confidence in the idea. And that's something it's a point I'd like to make as we go through the Parsha, the Haftarah this week. But first, let's start with the historical context. You come and you see Zechariah, so for some of us, including me, it's a little scary. It's one of the Nevi'im Achronim, and the language is kind of hard. But Zechariah is relatively straightforward, and the Haftarah, despite that it has some challenging language, and it's not a narrative, it's also relatively straightforward. So of course you have to ask yourself, when did Zechariah live? And the answer is he lived during the return for what was going to be the building of Beit Sheni, right? It was not a wildly successful return to Eretz Yisrael. The Navi makes clear 40,000 and change people. That's the entirety of the Aliyah that took place at the time. The context was Koresh, Melech Paras, had given us permission, even encouraged us to build Beit Sheni, right? Beit Rishon had been destroyed, 50-something, Rav Maidan thinks 50-something years beforehand, right? But then Koresh changed his mind. And it's none of our business this week to discuss why Koresh changed his mind. But there was some kind of aliyah. Even if it was disappointing, there was an aliyah. And in many ways also, I think the Haftarah mimics our day or parallels our day and a lot of things we're living through right now, right? So you have this question. Koresh rescinds his permission to build the Beit HaMikdash. All these people, okay, not so many, but 40-something thousand people are returning from Babel. And let's make it clear also, they were not the elite of the Jewish community. They were not the Talmidei Chachamim. They were not what we colloquially say, the lawyers and the doctors and whatever. They were the Hamonam. They were regular people. Maybe similar to the Aliyah that took place around the founding of the state, which it's hard to say they were the elite of the Jewish people came back, and maybe we're still paying a price for that. But the way I look at it now, so now's the question. Okay, Koresh has rescinded his permission to build the Beis HaMikdash. What do we do? What do the Jewish people do? Right? It's very similar to the discussion that takes place nowadays about, do we want to go on the Har Bayis or not? But we'll come back to that in a second. There are two Nevi'im that lived at the time. There's Chagai and there's Zechariah. Chagai is 1,000% clear. Who cares what the Goyim say? What matters is what the Jews do. Go ahead and build it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is on our side. That's all that matters. Zechariah is similar to Chagai, which is good, right? He's similar, but not exactly the same. There's slightly more nuance in Zechariah than there is in Chagai. And Zechariah says in our Haftarah, I'm sorry, these are the psukim the two psukim that begin right before our Haftarah. Ki cho amar Adonai tzvaot achar kavod shelachani al hagoyim hasholim etchem ki anogea bochem nogea bebavat eino. Right? If you touch, says God, warning the Gentiles, if you touch the Jewish people, it's like you're touching bavat eino, my pupil. I'm going to defend them. Ki hineni meinifet yadi aleihem. I'm going to protect them. V'hayu shalala abdehem v'datem ki Adonai tzvaot shalachani. And you'll know I'm an authentic Navi. I'm giving you the communication from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then Haftara starts, Rani v'simchi bat Tzion, ki hi niva v'shachanti b'tochech num Hashem. Right? God is going to live amongst us. Now here's where Zechariah is slightly different from Chagai. V'nilvu goyim rabim el Adonai bayom ahu, v'hayu li la'am, v'shachanti b'tochech v'yadat, ki Adonai tzvaot shalachani elayich. Right? The difference is Zechariah says, yes, you should continue building by Sheni, but don't worry, the Goyim are not going to oppose you. At the end, when you build it, the Goyim are going to come, the Nilvu Goyim Rabim, right? And they'll worship HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the Beis HaMikdash. Pasuk Tezayin, V'nachal Adonai et Yehuda chelko al admat HaKodesh u'vachar od b'Yushalayim, right? He's going to establish Yehuda in its portion, and he's going to choose once again for his chosen city to be Yerushalayim. Okay, that's the beginning of our Haftarah, and that's Zechariah telling the Jewish people, don't stop, build the Beis HaMikdash. Eventually the Goyim are going to join us, and they're going to come worship in the Beis HaMikdash. I mentioned this before, and it's just hard not to think about it when it comes up. It seems to me it's very similar to the conversation that people have nowadays about the Har Bayis, right? One approach is, yes, it's going to offend the Goyim, but who cares? It's ours. We have to show sovereignty. We have responsibility to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to go up on the Har Bayis and to daven and to proclaim the fact that it will in the future be the Makom HaMikdash. Right? That's what we have to do. That's what Chagai and Zechariah say. At the same time, the other position is, first of all, we don't have a Navi telling us what we're supposed to do. It's not fair to say Chagai and Zechariah would have said. They don't, right? And the second thing is, if it's going to cause World War III, maybe we have to be, a little more careful about how we go about it. Not that it matters what I think. I personally seem married in both positions. I remember Rav Lichtenstein Zatzal talking about the need for more Mikdash and how he doesn't have it. I have Rebbeim who are on either side of the issue. I think both sides are right. But I think that's a discussion that we're having right now. Do we care what the Goyim think? Do we want to offend them? Okay, that's the introduction to our Haftarah. And then we get to the meat of the Haftarah. And we read the following pasuk. In the beginning, the first pasuk in Perek Gimel of Zechariah. Vayareini et Yoshua HaKohen HaGadol omed lifnei malach Adonai, v'hasatan omed al yamino l'sitano. the Navi describes a really bizarre situation. The Malach, right, the Malach Hashem is obviously a good guy. He's on our team. He's standing on one side of Yoshua Kohen Gadol. Yoshua literally, historically, is the Kohen Gadol at the time, right? And on the other side of Yoshua is the Satan. And they're kind of having a machlokes. It's not exactly described in the Psukim, but the Satan is being mastin against us, right? He's arguing against us, and the Malach is arguing for us. And it's dramatic and it's bizarre. And God Kiviyachol has to choose between the Malach and the Satan. And he does. Next pasuk. Vayomer Adonai las Satan. Yigar Adonai b'cha Satan v'yigar Adonai b'cha bocher b'Yushalayim halo ze ud mutzal me'esh. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to the Satan, be quiet, it's enough already, I've heard from you. But Yoshua is the ud mutzal me'esh. Now, that's really a fascinating phrase, and I don't think it gets enough play, both in the Haftarah, but historically. Meaning, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying to the Satan, and it'll be clear in the next few psukim, yes, Yoshua did things wrong. It's true, he's lavush begadim soim, right? It's a metaphor, but it's showing us he's a sinner. He did things wrong. But, on the other hand, he's an ud mutzal me'esh. Literally, he's an ember saved from the fire. What does that mean? It means he lived through the churban. He lived through the galus. That's not a small thing. You're affected by what happens. You feel abandoned by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kiviyachol, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, cut him some slack. He's really been through a lot. What the pasuk really reminds me of is the Holocaust. I once heard someone say, maybe it was Rav Amital Zatzal, maybe not, that the question is not why a survivor lost his faith in the Holocaust. The question is how a believer kept his faith in the Holocaust, right? The feeling, and obviously I can only imagine it, but the feeling of being abandoned by God, the feeling of it's never going to get better, the feeling like, okay, it's true, HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose us, but we must have done something wrong. And now he's rejecting us, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is abandoning his people. It's hard to shake that feeling, and it's a terrible feeling. If you lived through the Churban, you lived through the self-doubt that you caused it, right? The Churban was destroyed because of the sins of Am Yisrael, and there were plenty of them during Bayis Rishon. And the feeling like, okay, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's rejected us. He destroyed his house. He sent us into exile. He's literally rejecting us. That's a horrible feeling. And not that justifies bad behavior, but in the Haftarah it sounds that way. Yoshua yalavush begadim tzoim, and nevertheless, HaKadosh Baruch Hu describes him as an ud mutzal me'esh. And here comes the next psukim. V'Yoshua yalavush begadim tzoim, dirty clothing, v'omed l'fnei hamalach. Vayan vayomer el ha'omdim l'fanav le'mor. Hasiru habigadim hatzoim me'alav. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to the people standing there, take off his dirty clothing. Vayomer elav re'ei ha'evarti me'elecha avonecha v'halbesh oto machalatzot. Right, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you see, I've taken off your dirty clothing. I've forgiven you in some way for the sins that you've done. And now we'll start again. Vayoma yasimut sanif ta'al rosho. Put a clean hat on his head. Vayosimu sanif ta'al rosho. Vayalbishu bigadim umalach al me'omed. The Satan's not there anymore. Just the Malach Hashem is standing there, presumably proudly looking at Yoshua wearing clean big day kahuna, as opposed to the Begadim Hatzoim that he had been wearing at the beginning. It's all true. Of course, it's a metaphor, but the meaning is clear, right? Yoshua was dirty, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't deny that. He doesn't say Yoshua didn't sin. It's a discussion in the Mefarshim, which we don't have time for, what his sin was or what his sin might have been. But God doesn't care. He says, clean him up, put clean clothing on him, and let's move on. And it's beautiful, and it's inspiring. And the message that God's commitment to us is unconditional. The fear that we have, the fear that anybody would have who lived through the Holocaust, who lived through Churban Beis HaMikdash, who lived through the Galus, the fear that God has abandoned us, it's not true. It's a concern. But it's not true. And it happens to be, for our generation, it's not even concerned at all. Our lives are so easy. It never dawned on me that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has abandoned us. But it was a concern for them. But it's not really as simple as I'm making it seem. Because if you continue to the next pasuk, the pasuk says, "Vayoad malach Adonai b'Yoshua le'mor, ko amar Adonai tzvaot, im bidrachai telech, v'im et mishmarti tishmor, v'gam ata tadin et beiti, v'gam tishmor et chatzerai, v'natati laham mehalchim bein ha'omdim ha'ela." God's love is unconditional. But God's relationship with us is not unconditional. God's closest to us is dependent on our behavior. I love my wife. I love my kids. Right? My wife watches this every week, so I have to be careful. But the fact of the matter is, my commitment to them is unconditional. But their behavior and my behavior, there's times of more closeness and times of less closeness. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu's commitment to Am Yisrael and to us is unquestionable. HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised, and He's going to keep that promise, and that's going to last la'ol me'ad. But it does depend on our behavior. Right? If we keep the Torah, it will be much better for us. We'll be much closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if we don't, God forbid, the opposite. There's going to be a geula. There was a geula. But what type of geula will it be? What's Bayis Sheni going to look like? Gadol Yabai, one of the possibilities was Gadol Yabai Tazami Arishon, right? Bayis Sheni was supposed to be amazing, bigger and better than Bayis Rishon. But it didn't happen that way. It didn't happen that way because people didn't respond to the call from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? In many ways, again, it mimics our current situation. Maybe if more religious Jews had made Aliyah when the state was founded, we'd have a different state now. I'm not complaining about what we have, but it could be better, right? It could be so much more than what we have. And it could have been if the Frum people had said, not just we're not opposing the state, but yes, we're all in, we're coming. It'd be a different world. Just one short thing, when the pasuk says, "V'natati laham mahalchim bein ha'omdim ha'ela," right? That's a really important pasuk. The phrase is, right, we human beings are mehalchim. Malachim are omdim. Omdim means you're standing still, right? The point for us is we're never standing still. Our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is always getting better or worse. It's never static. It's never the same. That's something that we live with. That's a responsibility we live with, and that's a joy that we live with. We always want to become closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's part of who we are, and that's our relationship with Him. Okay, but let's return to the Haftara and kind of wrap up our discussion with the bigger question, which is, why is this the Haftara of Beha'alotekha? Right? So we talked about our Haftara, we talked about not just the idea of the menorah at the beginning of Parashat Beha'alotekha and the menorah mentioned in the Nevuah of Zechariah. We talked also about the episodic nature of Parashat Beha'alotekha and the sort of episodic nature of Zechariah. But what is the episodic nature of Parashat Beha'alotekha? So we mentioned the stories at the beginning of the parasha. We mentioned the menorah and the Leviim and the Chatzot showed and the Masot. But then our parasha takes a terrible turn, right? We have Vayhi bin Saharon, the inverted nunim around them, and then that begins a really, really bad spiral of behavior towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu and towards Eretz Yisrael, right? The next thing is Vayhi ham kimit onanim, right? We're overcome by a desire for meat. We're overcome by physical desires. And a lot of the stuff I'm going to say now, I got from the most amazing lecture the Rav gave. People can look it up on Why You Told Him. Maybe I'll figure out a way to attach it to the shir. You know, his idea for Parashat Beha'alotekha, his idea for all of Sefer Bamidbar, it's really amazing. So he sees the Nun HaFuchim as inverting our history. Until that moment, we're about to start the great march into Eretz Yisrael, and then something terrible happens. Moshe senses it. Is the Mitonanim, and then you go to next week's Parsha, the Meraglim, and you go to the Parsha after that, Korach, and the desire to return to Mitzrayim. It's all a tragedy, okay? it all started with our giving into our physical desires, but it's a tragedy. It really is. It's the beginning of a really dark period in our history and in the Torah. And presumably then, if that's what we're about to have, if the second part of our parsha starts with the misbehavior, which normally would have been punished by a galut, right? But you can't really describe the midbar as galut because we've not been in Eretz Yisrael yet. But the gezerah of you're going to be in the midbar for 40 years was a death sentence for the Dor Yotzei Mitzrayim, right? In fact, that was part of it. If you're more than 20 when you left Mitzrayim, you're not ever going to see Eretz Yisrael. That's the end. You have no possibility of going into Eretz Yisrael. It's like a type of Churban. It's like a type of Golus. It's like a type of Holocaust. And that's what these people had to live through. And that's what they did live through. And Zechariah touches on the same theme, right? Reading about subsequent Galuyot and God's unconditional commitment to us, that's exactly what we need this Shabbos. We need it in those days, and we need it in our days, right? The idea that Moshe also uses the phrase, makdim rifuah l'makah. We're about to go into a type of galus. We're about to be slapped by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we have to know how to deal with it. That's the theme of Beha'alotekha. All great stories, and then terrible things happen, and it starts a downward spiral. That's the theme of Haftara. How do we deal with galus? How do we overcome being exiled from the land? How do we come back to the land? All these themes are the themes of Parshas Beha'alotekha and are the themes of the Haftara from Zechariah. I hope we learn our lessons. I hope that our life is great going forward. And thank you very much. And see you next week. Shabbat Shalom.